Rollo Tomassi, how are you doing?
Good, good. How are you?
I'm doing all right,
I
man.
don't know if I should call you Dr. Thunder or Shawn.
I, you can call me what you like.
Okay.
Just not late for dinner, right? So, yeah. So I just had a rehearsal, and rushed here after the rehearsal. Usually I do these at around 9:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. That has tended to be the time. Interviewing like on Mondays and Wednesdays. These interviews are not live streamed. It gives me a little more, production stuff that I can do. I can cut stuff if I need to. I don't think I'm going to want to cut anything out of this interview. I have so many things I'd like to discuss with you. Now, one thing that I did was there's a few folks that I asked for some questions. I've got some folks that I really admire and trust. And actually, one of them was Mumia Obsidian Ali. So he's got a couple questions. Another question is going to come from Green Gorilla. And then I've got a question for you, or a couple questions from BGS, Ibmore. So, but those will be kind of worked in as we get to them. But I did want to shout those folks out.
I know Obsidian. I've known Obsidian for a long time now, actually.
Yeah. So, you're a musician.
Yes.
And
amongst other things, but yes.
And one of the things I noticed right from the beginning of watching your videos, of course, the sound panels behind you and the guitars on the wall. And those have changed, it seems, somewhat. Talk to us about your guitar collection.
Sure. Oh gosh, I don't even see. What's funny is whenever I'm recording or if I'm working on something, like the bass usually stays here because I have two basses. One's downstairs and then this one stays up here when I'm doing recording in the studio. The guitar behind me is, if you can see that right there, that's an OD Cytherea. And it was made by a luthier by the name of Omer Deutsch or Detmer. I can't remember. It was Omer or something, right? And he's in Israel. And he does boutique guitars. And he's one, as far as I'm concerned, he's probably one of the finest luthiers I've ever known. And if you want to follow him, by the way, it's OD_guitars on Instagram. And he's got his own website and stuff too. It's OD Guitars. He goes to the NAMM show, the National Association of Musicians Merchants show.
Yeah.
And so it's like there's what's interesting is there's a lot of guys that do boutique guitars, I guess is what the term is. And so it's basically custom made guitars. The one he has a few different models. This one's the Cytherea, which is I think he does mostly like Venus and Minerva and stuff like that. He's got goddess names for his guitars. And then it's all custom done. So this one back here is Swamp Ash, and the neck is it's through the body. It's through the body, as you can see back here.
Yeah.
So the whole thing. He does custom work for a lot of different guitar players, but most notably, if you're familiar with the band Ginger, Roman, the guy who's the lead guitarist in Ginger, plays. I think he's got an endorsement with OD right now, and so they're very they're custom ordered. Like the pickups in that are bare knuckles impulse pickups, and then I got a few other here. I got this is my ESP Limited.
Yeah.
For whatever reason, I tend to gravitate towards I gravitate towards guitars that have abalone abalone inlays on them for some reason. I've got quite a few different guitars, and I'll tell you what's interesting is I mean over the years I've been picking up a lot of different guitars. Ibanez bass here is a Destroyer, and I've got an old 1984 guitar version of it up there too. The studio is much larger in the back here than it is right here, but I'm trying to think how can't remember the last time somebody asked me about how many guitars I own. I probably have, I mean, if you include my my acoustics, I'm certain I've got about 15 or 20 guitars. My house looks like Guitar Center.
That's funny.
I even I'll tell you what's funny is I because of the boutique guitar thing, I took it upon myself to actually start. I picked up a raw bodied like a poplar body guitar, and I've been learning how to stain, and I'm not like actually a luthier per se, but I can buy all the parts and put it all together. So I'm in the if you follow me on Instagram, you'll see a couple of shots of my of the guitar that I'm working on right now, and I'm just learning how to stain. And I wish I could be as good as Omer, but I'm learning how to sort of put things together and do my own custom guitars now. I've been playing in a band called Trial of Ascension for 2.5 years now. And as a result of playing, and it's a very technical, it's probably the most intense band I've ever played in. We're professional musicians. We're not like, we don't just get together on the weekends and play covers and drink beer in someone's garage. I mean, we have our own dedicated space, and we put out actually 2 4-song EPs are on Spotify right now, and we're actually going into studio this month as soon as I get back from Miami. To do my parts, but while I'm gone, they'll probably be recording drums, and we'll probably we usually do 1 EP every summer, and so there'll be a 4-song EP coming out on Spotify once again. We play out around here in the Reno area, but we're planning on doing some more like live streams from the rehearsal studio right now. A lot of bands are doing that. I see,
and very effective
bands I follow, because it opens you up to a much broader audience than just like what your local music scene might be. As I was saying before, this guy Giovanni that I follow on Instagram, I wouldn't have found him any other way than the fact that he's like one of my readers, and he also happens to be a very, very talented musician. And so we kind of, we connect. I've connected with some other guys. I forget the guy's name. He's in a Depeche Mode cover band, but a very, very talented musician, very, very talented singer. But it's interesting to me that when people find out that Rollo Tomassi is a musician, and I don't classify myself as being like some really superstar musician or anything like that. I just like to do it. I'm just doing it because I love it and I enjoy it. It's certainly not for the money. But I do it because that's just something that I like to do, and it's something that's set apart from pretty much every other aspect of my life. But as far as my guitars are concerned, man, I've got a collection of at least 20, including my acoustics. I own let's see, the rare ones I own is this one right here. I've also got a Gibson. It's not an electric, it's actually a acoustic. I studied flamenco and Latin guitar for about 6 years. Back in the early 2000s, I think. And it's a classical guitar, and it's from 1963, and it's called the C0, and they only did a very limited run of the C0s and the C1s, and you can still find them on like reverb.com, but I think they go for like somewhere between like $800 and $1,200 right now, which surprised me because when I picked it up, I just thought it was a great guitar. It's the only Gibson I own too. But I have mostly Kramers, Ibanez, and ESPs right now.
Yeah, this is interesting. So you're not just a musician, or you don't just have a guitar hanging in your studio behind you. Oh no, you're actually sort of a gear junkie.
Oh yeah,
like I am.
I like to tinker with stuff. I'm an artistic person to begin with. This is just one of the things that I do artistically, but I also like weird like stringed instruments. I've got 2 Irish bouzoukis. I don't know if you're familiar with. They're kind of like an oud, but they're like the Irish version of like an oud, like a Middle Eastern, which I would love to buy. By the way, I want to pick up an oud at some point because I love the sound. If you listen to we've got a song called, it's the title track of the last EP. It's called Phoenix. And there's an intro that sounds really kind of like Egyptian or like Middle Eastern. And that intro I play on that bouzouki. It's just a really quick, probably like 4 or 6 measures. I can't remember. But I'm playing that, and that just adds something else to it, I think. And I really like that kind of stuff. I'm actually looking at maybe buying a harp guitar at some point too.
Yeah, you mentioned Guitar Center. I have spent way too much time in Guitar Center. Matter of fact, I was just on the phone with them earlier today because I've got something on order.
Mm-hmm. I'm the last person that needs to go walking into Guitar Center because I'll walk out. I'll tell you.
Thank you so much for watching my video so far. If you'd like to support, there are several ways to do so below. Also, likes are free. Please comment, share, and subscribe. Now back to the video.
Guitar Center because I'll walk out. I'll tell you what's funny. When I am on the road, when I'm doing like shit, when I'm going and doing talks like at Rebel Capitalist, or I'm out doing Fresh and Fit in Miami, this is how bad I am. I actually bought an Ibanez like classic. It's like a thin-bodied Latin, classical flamenco style guitar. You can plug it in, but I bought it and I had it delivered to Sterling Cooper's house so that I would have a guitar when I go out to Miami. And I think it's with my boy Tom right now. So when I go out there, I go, okay, Tom, I'm at such and such hotel. Bring it here, and then I'll have it for the week, and I'll give it back to him. And then the next month or two later, I'll come back out, and at least I'll have something that I can sort of keep my chops up on.
So in addition to being a musician, you're a father and a husband. And so you've been married for a number of years.
Going on 26. July 20th, it'll be 26 years.
And this is, it's interesting because most of the folks in this sort of manosphere, red pill, Black Manosphere, MGTOW, all of those, they tend to be sort of anti-marriage, and not just anti-marriage, sort of not even willing to do even like what Donovan Sharp is doing with a long-term relationship. Now, why do you think that is? Of course, I have an idea of what you're going to say, but why is it that you think that is, and why is it that you yourself it seems that you've found a way to sort of, I'm married also, by the way, right? And I've been married for 14 years. I've got an 8-year-old son. So part of my reason and interest in this sort of red pill space and dating and what's happening in the 21st century and all that is because I want to be able to provide a certain kind of counsel to my son when he becomes of age. My father, who's only ever been with one woman, my mom, and they're still married, by the time I was dating, things had changed so much. He was never going to be able to give me any sort of counsel about what it was actually going on because everything had changed so much. But I got married just prior to when social media became big, and then Instagram and then Tinder and all of that stuff. Once that stuff got in, I had already been married, so I kind of I got out just in time when the getting was good, as it were. But I'm saying that to say, so marriage seems to be a problematic thing for a lot of folks, and in particular, it seems to be a topic, an institution that provides a lot of risks. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. I get it from both sides, quite honestly. My joke has always been this, is that I'm too red pill to be married, and I'm too married to be red pill, right? I mean, that's the joke, right? I get it from both sides. It's like, Rollo Tomassi can't be married, he's red pill. And then Rollo Tomassi can't be red pill because he's married, right? And only a beta male, only a chump would get married, right? Well, first off, I got married back in 1996, so that's number one. Number two, and yes, I mean, I hate to use the cop out that like, oh, I'm from a different generation, so we're just better than you. Like, that's not what I'm saying. I never try to I never use my marriage as any kind of an example when I'm talking about things. I think a lot of people get confused by that, and I've tried on God knows how many different live streams or how many different interviews that I've talked about this. I actually got asked this question on the Patrick Bet-David show, and they said, but you sound like you're very anti-marriage. And I say, well, I am. I'm anti-marriage in the way that we do it now, in the way that the institution of marriage has been sort of corrupted and turned into, well, I mean, it's been a commercial enterprise for a very long time, but I've been on record as saying that getting married right now is probably one of the worst all downside risks a man can take. I've compared, if you read my fourth book, Religion, there's a big, thick chapter in the very middle of that book where I talk about how marriage is an unconscionable contract. And what I mean by that's a legal term. I didn't just make that up. An unconscionable contract is a contract into which no rational, sane person would enter into it if they knew all the details about what the stipulations and the terms of that contract were going to be. And so those types of contracts, like an unconscionable contract, they can't be upheld in a court of law. And so I've made comparisons to how we do marriage now in comparison to an unconscionable contract, meaning that marriage tends to be an all downside risk, at least in the United States and in many Western countries as well. There's no reason to get married to be a guy. You have more rights, you have more maneuverability, you have more opportunity outside of marriage than you do inside of marriage. And honestly, I think that's kind of tragic because it didn't used to be that way. It used to be something that was a mutually beneficial arrangement between a man and a woman. And prior to the sexual revolution, marriage meant something far different than all the generations that came before the sexual revolution in comparison to the generations that came after it. And so really since about 1965, since the advent of hormonal birth control and the sexual revolution and the free love movement and with the boomers and then Gen X, which is my generation, and millennials and Gen Z, really since about the early 70s, maybe 1970, just to round it off, marriage has turned into something very different than prior generations knew what marriage was. And I don't think that it's been so gradual over the course of 4 different generations that I don't think that people really that we take it for granted that this is just what marriage is. And so your grandmother and your great grandmother and your great grandfather had a different approach or a different understanding of certainly what gender roles were, and certainly what the contract or what the I don't even want to call it a contract, what the institution of marriage was and what it is now. So when people say Rollo Tomassi, he's been married for 26 years, or 25 years, he's not living what he talks. I was like, you're goddamn right, I'm living what I talk, because I'm telling you, as a happily married man, if you want to call it success or fail, whatever, a successfully married man, a guy who's been doing exactly what every tradcon, red pill guy wants to say is this is what you ought to be doing. I'm doing it, but I'm a jerk because I'm also saying that as a successfully married, I have pretty much what most men would call an ideal marriage. My wife looks up to me. She admires me. She loves me. We still have great sex at 25 years later. We have one daughter. I probably, if I have any regrets, I probably would have had another kid maybe. But other than that, my daughter is fantastic. She's finishing her master's degree and graduating, as a matter of fact, this weekend, magna cum laude. So I must have done something right. I must have helped, I contributed something to that success. So I've contributed, or I've attributed, I should say, my the success of my marriage and the success of my parenting as being a father greatly to understanding red pill awareness and understanding game, because along with that, it comes an understanding of male nature and female nature and intersexual dynamics. And I think that it's a much more rational, reasonable approach. I think what people have a really difficult time really wrapping their heads around is accepting that nature in respect to what they believe it ought to be. And so when I say, look, as a successfully married, being in this marriage that I'm in right now, for a guy who is in that position to tell you, I would not get married again. If suddenly I was widowed tomorrow, or found myself single tomorrow, I would never get married ever again. Certainly not in these conditions right now. There's a really great documentary. I think it was right around 2012 or 2013. It's called Divorce Incorporated. And
Yeah,
it was
yeah,
done by
yeah,
Dr.
yeah.
Drew Pinsky and some other people. I can't remember. He's the guy who's the narrator of it. And it will show you how the economic machine of marriage and divorce works in the United States, and all of the things and all of the money and all the expenditures and all the numbers that happen before you get married, when you get married, when you go through divorce, and after divorce. So because remember, you're also dealing with the post-divorce financial, situations that come as a result of that. Like they had couples in this documentary who they were married for like maybe 4 years, and it took them 8 years to get divorced, and to the tune of like $25,000, $50,000, whatever it was, back in 2012. And when you see that, and when you look at this, of course, we're dealing with the lowest marriage rate in since they started recording it back in 1890 or 1848 or 49. We're looking at 5.1 per 1,000 people in the United States are married these days. And the age of first marriage, for the average age of first marriage right now, is now 30 for men, and it's about 28 and a half for women right now. And it didn't used to be that way. I mean, back prior to the sexual revolution, it was the men were 22 and women were 20. And that was the average age of first marriage back then. Because again, you could say, well, socioeconomically, things were different. Yes, it was. But also socially, we were also looking at a pre-sexual revolution generation and a post-sexual revolution generation. So when people come at me and they say, Rollo, you're married, we should not listen to what you're having to say. I'm like, you should listen to what I have to say even more, because I'm a successfully married guy, and I'm telling you, I would not get married, and certainly not under these conditions right now. And that ought to put a chill down your spine, quite honestly.
So a couple of things. So you're known as the Godfather.
One of
there's
them.
another there's another Godfather that just passed away, untimely death. Dude is really fit. And
around my age too, by the way.
yeah, still not much information is really known. I mean, I just listened to the 911
so did I.
call, and but there's not really much known about what happened. I mean, they know it's some sort of a heart attack. We know that he had cancer early in his life, and sometimes that stuff can come back. Often it does. And so it's hard to say. I'm bringing Kevin Samuels up because Kevin, who was not married, had been divorced twice, was an advocate for marriage. Now, this is unusual for the space. Both of you are unusual for the space. You being married, giving the advice that you give, him not being married and having failed at it twice, still hoping to get married again, as he would frequently say, and encouraging others to get married. One thing I will say is marriage, shout out to CGA, marriage is the best environment to have kids in. It's the best situation for the kids. But as you illustrated, went into detail discussing, it's not a great deal from a legal perspective for men. The laws would have to be totally changed. You have a lot of folks now having a ceremony but not being legally married because at least in that scenario, there's less risk associated with someone that women are initiating 80% of the divorces, especially in the Black community, and so you're doing a good job. You think you're being a good husband. You're doing all the things you think you're supposed to be doing. Happy wife, happy life, everything. And then all of a sudden, I was like, oh snap! What's this? What's this paperwork I'm seeing? So I'm saying this to and we can kind of segue a bit into talking about Kevin and what you believe his impact to be, how important you believe his voice to be. But it's interesting that you both are on the sort of opposite side of that. Him being divorced twice, being an advocate, you being married but being sort of anti-marriage. So, what do you think of that? And then anything else you want to sort of add?
Sure. Once again, I got to refer to my fourth book, Religion, and the marriage chapter in there. I mentioned a story one time, like when I was doing the Pat Campbell terrestrial radio show. I did an interview with Dr. Everett Piper. I don't know if you're familiar with him, but he used to be the principal, the provost, I guess, of Wesleyan University in Tulsa, in Oklahoma. Very religious guy, and the hour debate that I had with him was pro-marriage versus anti-marriage. And I mean, that's really what it boiled down to. But I had to take the anti-marriage side because I knew there's no other position he was going to take. And again, I'm not anti-marriage. I'm anti the way we do it now. So my perspective when I was having that debate with Dr. Piper was the way I hit it. My approach was exactly what you just said a moment ago. There's a difference between the desire for men and women to want to sort of come together, form a relationship, have sex, have kids, and form a family. Because that's the basis really of, the family unit. And I'm not going to say even nuclear family. I'm just going to say the family unit, a man, a woman, and a child or two, and a golden retriever in the front yard, right? The idea of that, or the concept of that, I think is integral to the human condition, in that we have to, as a species, as what we are, as the human machine on this planet, we have to at least come together and at least compromise our sexual strategies, our mating strategies, in order to be invested in children. And the best way we have known to do that throughout the course of human history has been to form families, and then our families become our tribes, and our tribes become our nations. And so when we talk about how the family is the sort of the base unit of the strength of a nation, that's what they're talking about. It's just like exponentially it scales up from the family unit all the way up to a national unit, or a religion, or politics, or whatever your tribe ends up being. We have lots of tribes, but your first tribe is always going to be your family, because you are blood related. And so there's some evolutionary aspect that goes along with that as well, with kin altruism, that kind of stuff. But when I was having this discussion with Dr. Piper, I told him, I said, from the outset, let me tell you, I'm not against the institution or the idea of monogamy and marriage. Clearly, I'm not. I've been married for 25 years. So, but I was just saying, my point was this, is that the way that we're doing it right now is not sustainable, because we are living in the 21st century, and we still have these 20th century ideals for what we think marriage ought to be. And I've said in the past, I'll say it right now, is I believe that men and women are complements to one another. We are innate, evolved complements to one another. My strengths make up for my wife's weaknesses, and vice versa. We are innate natural complements. We have to, at some point, compromise our mating strategies between men and women, which are adversarial. And at some point, we have to say, okay, I'm going to forsake all others, and I'm only going to be with you, and I'm going to provide for you. I'm going to protect you, and I'm going to be parentally invested in you. And the other side of that equation is that the child has to be mine. And we're going to, you make these same marriage vows or these promises, however we want to arrange marriage. There is that compromise between men and women, where I'm a complement, you're a complement, we're better together than we are apart. I have always said that. And so when people like come at me and say, well, Rollo's, he wants everybody to think that he's, living the life where he's got like all these side pieces and everything. That's never been what I've said. But because I'm in the Manosphere, because I've been talking about what I've been talking about, because I've talked about spinning plates, because I've talked about dating non-exclusively, I'm not saying, as a matter of fact, I've come out against poly several times in several essays and several different interviews and videos that I've done. And I'm against poly polyamory, not for moralistic reasons, but simply pragmatic, logistical reasons. And so when I look at all these advocates for like sort of like alternative relationship styles, I go, that's not sustainable. That's not sustainable to create a family. That's not sustainable to have a mother that is a conventionally feminine mother and a father that is a conventionally masculine father, that form those models of masculinity and femininity for the children that are in that family unit, married or otherwise, whatever you want to call that compromise and that arrangement. And so when I was talking to Dr. Everett Piper, of course, he's talking about like, we did need to have men and women need to do these things. And he's very traditional, and I have nothing that I wouldn't have expected from him. But we separated out into what he called the covenant marriage versus the contractual marriage. And I think the contractual marriage is really, when you involve the state and when you involve sort of a commercialized social imperative and expectations on marriage, and you legislate that and you turn marriage into an unconscionable contract, that corrupts the
especially when people can vote to change the laws.
Yes.
Right. So it could be just some fad to change an aspect of marriage that totally creates all kinds of problems.
Yeah. Well, like when I talked to my friend Abu American Craig, he's a Muslim, and I believe he's got 4 wives. He might be 3 or 4. I don't know which. He's got, you can have up to 4 in Islam, right? And when I was writing religion, he was one of the guys that I went to. He was my go-to guy when it came to, sort of ask a Muslim. And I was asking him about marriages, and he says, I don't have, Muslims don't have orgies, we don't have like, breeding parties or whatever. It's like I have 3 separate wives, 4 separate wives, and I go and I see them individually, and I have 4 separate families, and that's how it works. And that's because, and he's not contractually married, the certificate wise, he's not contractually married to any of his wives, but because they all have the same religion and they all are on board with their same belief sets and their same values in that same institution, they don't need, or they don't feel they need, and that contractual arrangement that goes along with, sort of contractual marriage. So in the eyes of Allah, he is married to his 3 or 4 wives, and they see it the same way, and they're on board with the whole thing. Now, thing is the state's still on the women's side. So if any one of those wives wants to say, hey, I'm out, or, marital infidelity or marital rape or whatever else it is that he's done, the law in the state is still on the side of the women. Although I think he's probably in Germany, but I'm not sure that it's too much different. So there's still going to be that legal aspect. The state is still behind women, no matter what your arrangement is with that particular person. And I brought this up as well, and I think this is sort of pertinent to the conversation, is that when, I think it was in 2015, when we ratified or we legalized same-sex marriage back then, when people were talking about that, the left always wanted to talk about how, well, it's love is love. If they're getting together and they're happy, how does that hurt you or whatever? Well, it doesn't. But what happens is it redefines the terms of traditional conventional marriage.
Of course.
When you do that. But remember, and I always throw this one out there. I love to throw this one at like Modern Life or Modern Life Dating John or Ryan or something like that. I said, remember, it's not homosexual marriage, it's same-sex marriage. So I, as a heterosexual man, could marry John from Modern Life Dating as a heterosexual man. And the terms of our marriage is that I get to go out and bang random women, and he gets to do the same. But legally, in the eyes of the state, John and I would still be married, but the terms of however we arrange that is irrelevant to what the state thinks of as, marriage or whatever. It doesn't have to be like, it could be 2 men who are heterosexual, by the way. So whatever those terms are, and if you breach that contract and you want to get divorced, suddenly I want to get divorced from John because he did something I hated, then I could go and do that as a heterosexual guy in a same-sex marriage. And it doesn't necessarily have anything to do with homosexuality. It's just the contract. I don't think enough people really realize that, because when you put it into those terms, then you suddenly realize what I'm talking about when I talk about like the way that we do marriage right now, contractually or by the state, has corrupted the innate desire for a man and a woman to get together and form a family. So it's no longer, it's almost like that there's this, like Dr. Everett Piper calls it the covenant marriage, which is like just before you and the society and God. And then there is the contractual marriage, which is society, social media, I guess now, and the legalities and the divorce machine and the marriage machine that goes along with that. And so for me to try to describe what I just said to you on like a 15-minute interview with like Patrick Bet-David, it's next to impossible to do that. So it's very easy for me to get sort of taken out of context when I'm trying to describe these things, because it's not an elevator pitch. You have to actually have some sort of understanding of the difference between those two. But again, I am very much for complementary men and women coming together. So in terms of like how Kevin Samuels realized things, the only problem I had with that message is that he's trying to bring Black men and Black women together in marriage. And I'm saying that's a noble cause, but the problem is that it's always going to fail until you find some way to reform marriage, until you find some way to have an incentive, for an upside incentive for men to actually want to get married. Also, women would have to in some way be able to sort of tamp down their what's called the choice paradox, right? They're online, they're on social media all the time. So even the guy who's the best dude that they can do there's always somebody else online who might be better than this guy if he drops the ball. And so when Myron and Fresh on Fresh and Fit say, well, women should delete their Instagram once they become, exclusive with you. The reason why women bristle at that is because it removes that choice. It removes that fail safe, or the security blanket that if it doesn't work out with this guy, at least I got my pictures on Instagram, or at least I'm still on Tinder and I can still make up for lost time if this doesn't work out. Carry that over into a marriage and it ruins the marriage. So we got all these competing influences. And so that's why I keep saying I'm not against men and women coming together in monogamous, loving bliss to form families. But the way that we form that arrangement now, or the way that we institutionalize that, has been entirely corrupted in the 21st century.
So one thing that I've noticed that is different with the Black Manosphere and the Manosphere is the Black Manosphere is very much more interested in repairing the Black community and sort of providing a certain kind of mentorship to a disproportionate number of men that have not had relationships with their father. Mm-hmm. Right? So there's a lot of talking points and content that seem to be targeted at that. Mm-hmm. I did a show called I've got a live streaming program on Thursdays at 9:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time called Thunder's Thoughts. Mm-hmm. And one of the recent episodes I did was called Here's Why Arranged Marriage Would Never Work in the Black Community. And I distilled out of the conversation 22 points, 22 specific reasons. In dysfunction, the way that the marriage laws are, there's a long list of things. Okay, but I believe that the solution, the actual solution for the Black community, and these if you implemented these two things, if you could get everybody to get on board, which you can't. And this is why it wouldn't work, is because you can't get everybody on board. Mm-hmm. The two things that we need is abstinence and arranged marriage. Mm-hmm. All right? Because obviously, we have a problem with mate selection. And though I think that disproportionately, since women control the access to sex, disproportionately the mate selection is broken in our women. Mm-hmm. Where characteristics and qualities of folks that you should be prioritizing, things that can create stability and consistency and long-term providence and protection and all that kind of stuff. Like when you're in high school, you should be trying to date the guy that's spending all his time in the library, right? Not the person that has
speaking, yeah. Deductively speaking, yes.
right. But of course, I understand why that doesn't work that way, because there's genetic reasons for that. It's what you want, and trying to fight off what you want for what's best for you is the challenge. And of course, I think men have a similar challenge. I mean, I know that I've made all kinds of bogus choices with respect to women. That's been maybe my single biggest consistent failure is bad choices with respect to women. Of course, I got it right this last time, and found someone that I think is worthy. But I think I would be in the same boat as you if I was not married. I don't. It seems like it's a pretty risky proposition to get out here and do this, unless you had a lot of folks that had submitted themselves to some sort of vetting process, and then, and it could be, it's voluntary. I'm not talking about child brides. That's not what I'm talking about when I say arranged marriage. I'm talking about.
What's odd is that you even have to add that as a caveat. You even have to say that.
I know. Yeah. So I'm not talking about that. I'm not talking about forced marriage.
Bringing up the idea of like prearranged marriages, that it conjures up the connotation, the instant image that comes into your head is that, he must be talking about Islamic child brides.
Right. One of the reasons why I said
default, that, isn't it?
Yeah. One of the reasons that I said it wouldn't work is because the SJWs wouldn't allow it to work. And that's and that's the reason, is because they would bring up all of that goofy stuff, and you're subjugating women, and you're bringing us back to the to the 40s or whatever.
You're a chauvinist, yes.
Right. So I recognize that there's all these significant issues, and I think as the out of wedlock birth rate continues to rise in the white community, I think what you see in the black community is coming for the white community in general, because the dysfunction that we see is not genetic. It's based on the sort of a dearth of fathers. So I've said a bunch of stuff, but you can jump in anywhere.
Sure. Yeah, let me throw a few ideas at you. Okay. So you gave me the black community. We'll get to that. And I do agree with the fatherhood thing, but that's probably another topic. But let's talk about really quickly the idea of prearranged marriages and premarital sex, or abstinence, as you were saying. I actually include those topics in the fourth book. Once again, I think prearranged marriages are a fantastic idea, and I understand the reason for them. Now, are they tenable in 2022? No, they haven't been tenable for a long time. Am I going to be an advocate for prearranged marriages? No, absolutely not. But however, when I was considering, why is it that prearranged marriages are such a big deal, right? And of course, as I was saying before, is the moment you say prearranged marriage, you think child bride, right? You think of like ISIS, or Boko Haram, give us our girls back. And they're like spoils, like the little girls in Boko Haram were spoils of war for the tribal warlords in Africa, right? And so when you think of those things, that conjures that up. And I was like, why is it that we think of it in those terms? Why does this seem like such a barbaric practice? And of course, we tend to lean towards extremes, right? It's the slippery slope. It's like, well, that's what it's going to lead to. It's because of the patriarchy, and it's because men want control, and it's because it's a political arrangement. And it's like, well, yeah, in the past, for very powerful families, it was a way to align like political alliances. But it wasn't prearranged marriages wasn't limited just to the royalty and the nobility of Western Europe, or even India or China or wherever else. I mean, the common folk did the same thing. So it was a best practice of the time, because, and I realize this, I think, a little bit more personally now, because I have a daughter who is now 24 years old. She has a boyfriend, and she's done really well with, the guys that she's been, intimate with, and she's had boyfriends, as I said. And the guy that she's with right now definitely meets my approval. But as a father of, my daughter, who is an only child, I kept thinking, man, it would be really great if I could go and pick out the guy that she was going to marry, and I would have my wife and I would have our daughter's best interest in mind when we're looking for a husband to not just to be in a marriage with my daughter, but also to align two families together. And I don't mean that political alliance. I mean, I don't want my son-in-law to be a broke ass bum. I don't want my daughter. I want the best for my daughter. I want her to be with an alpha guy who's on his game, who's, in shape, is good looking, makes a lot of money, is good at what he does, is on his purpose. I want that for her. I want her to be with that guy. And that would be who I would look for, who I would consider as somebody who would be a suitable. And then, of course, I would look at their family, and I would look at, because I don't want my family to be married to another family, essentially, because I'm going to have grandchildren through her with whoever's family, the kid that she's with. And wouldn't it be great if I could step in as a father and say, look, I've lived, 50 some odd years on this planet, and wouldn't it be great if you, I would make a very good decision for you, and I'd be very, very, considerate of, I'm not going to get you with an ugly ass dude. So I'm thinking about that, and I'm going, it makes sense to have especially in a patriarchal society, for a man, for a father to be the one who has the interests of their daughters and their sons, for that matter, in terms of prearranged marriages. Because again, you think about, in the past, we got married much, much younger. It just simply made sense that if a worldly wise father had that interest in it, that it would be a better situation. I mean, a mutually beneficial situation between your family and whatever family that your son or your daughter marries into. So from a logistical, practical, ideal sense, prearranged marriages make complete sense. I totally understand why they would be a thing. There's also, the reason why it's a romantic kind of chivalrous thing for the suitor of your daughter to come and ask her father for her hand in marriage, right? I mean, if you've ever watched Braveheart, that's one of the things that happened in a Scottish Highlands. That was just the way they did things. And we think, oh, how romantic. No, there's a practical reason for that.
That's right.
I don't want my daughter to marry this broke ass guy and be married into these, drug meth addicts or whatever. I don't want that for you. I can see that, but you're blinded by love. So I'm going to say yes, or I'm going to say no, as if the guy is going to come to me and ask for my daughter's hand in marriage. It's just, now it seems like some nice little pleasantry, but it used to be something that had a lot of function and a lot of purpose to back in the day. And we don't think of it in those terms, because we think of it in terms of a woman should be able to choose whoever she wants to be with. Oh, okay. And I'm not necessarily against that, but I'm just saying that when independent women want to make their own decisions for them, that I don't have any problem with them doing that. What I have a problem with is them seeking to be absolved of the bad results or the bad consequences of decisions that they made, and expecting men to, or maybe even your family, to help you absolve them, or to reconcile the bad decisions that their daughter or their son, for that matter, has made. And so, in the sense,
and all that's going to do, all that does when you don't hold folks accountable, is it ensures that they will continue to make worse and worse decisions.
Yes.
I teach others to make those decisions.
I compared it to this. Do you remember? You've probably seen Tinder Swindler, and I watched that that documentary on Netflix, and we got 3 women who have taken out God knows how many loans. The first woman met the guy on Tinder. And was meeting up with this guy within an hour or two of meeting, matching with him on Tinder, and flying on his private jet to, I don't know, Belgium or wherever they were going. And I'm like, would there even be a documentary had this woman's father stepped in, or a brother, or a nephew, or an uncle, or any male, any conventionally masculine male guy that says, you are not getting on that plane. That guy's insane, and you're insane for even considering this. But the man coming in there and saying and asserting his authority and saying, no, you're not going to do this. I mean, you're not going to take out one loan, let alone 9 loans. But the downstream effect from all of that is now she's, $250,000 in debt for what she was doing. And all it would have taken is one person. I mean, it could be male or female, but it would take one man to come in there and say, no, you don't.
Yeah, this is one of the reasons that I cited why arranged marriage wouldn't work, is because even in the situation when there are people that are around that are sort of like, is this the guy that you want? They're kind of like, get out of my business.
Don't judge me.
Mind your own business.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Or even bring up stuff that you've done. So, you some kind of.
That's a logical fallacy, by the way, is to when you're criticized, when somebody's criticized, they end up criticizing you back so they can reframe the argument back on you. It's a logical fallacy. We're not talking about me. We're talking about you. And this is insane.
Yeah. I mean, but you brought up a lot of, good
practicality, good reasons. The latent purpose of prearranged marriages makes sense. In an ideal world, okay? I'm not saying that there aren't fathers who are going to, marry off their daughters for like 4 goats and a cow or something like that. I understand that, but you have to put all that, slippery slope nonsense to the side and say, why is this a thing in the first place? When did this ever make sense? Well, it made sense so you don't get the downstream effects of Tinder swindler. So you don't get the downstream effects of a woman's making a bad decision and we can't hold her account. Hell, we can't even have the conversation without being called misogynist or without being controlling or possessive or judgy or judgmental. So we can't even have the conversation, let alone. So that's why I keep saying it's untenable.
Or insecure.
In this day and age. The other thing you said was premarital sex. And oddly, and as odd as this is going to sound, I understand why that's a thing. I understand why that's a proscription, I guess, in religions. And there's a good amount of science to actually back that up. So when you look at women with higher body counts, promiscuous women have a tougher time, and I'm going to say the word pair bonding, for lack of a better term, with a long-term mate later on down the road. So if you go and you look at the studies and you look at the statistics, the research that's been done really since the early 90s all the way up to where we're at right now, there's several different researches where women are reporting lower marital happiness. They have higher incidence of divorce. They have higher rates of depression. And of course, STDs as well. that kind of comes with the territory. But when women go from like, say, 0 partners and they have 1 partner, well, the incidence, you don't know any better, then you're probably happy because you just, ignorance is bliss. But like when women have lower body counts, they tend to have better marriages. And I mean this in terms of like pair bonding, because people throw this at me. Pair bonding is, they want to, talk about it in scientific, etymological terms. Marriages, let's just say. Women report less happiness and more depression and satisfaction when they have fewer partners than when they have more partners. So it kind of, when guys throw this at me, I'll say, well, think of it this way. It's not so much a numbers game as it is the alpha impression game. So when a woman has 10 different partners, odds are that amongst those 10, there's going to be 1 or 2 guys amongst those 10 partners who were, so they're the alpha widows. Like again, this is something on my first book. They are the guys who had such an impact on those women that they still pine for them even after they married the guy that they settled on, and simply keep coming back to in their heads and fantasizing about it. And even if it's not somebody they actually knew, maybe it's somebody that they think is better than the guy that they're with. The problem is, of course, is that the more of those guys there are, the odds are that there's going to be like more men upon which who have like sort of imprinted on that woman. Well, that to me seems like a good case for no sex before marriage. And for guys, that's a compromise as well, because guys want to have sex. That's our biological imperative. It's our mating strategy, is unlimited access to unlimited sexuality. We expect more control, self-control in men when it comes to sexuality than we do for women, and certainly today, because men, our sexuality is always on. It's not cyclic like women's sexuality. It's not according to a menstrual cycle. Men, ejaculate and evacuate. Has always been our innate sort of primal mating strategy. Now we have to sort of compromise that. Most men can't realize that as it is, unless of course they have pornography, which is now free and streaming. And there's a reason it's free, because men's primary mating strategy is unlimited access to unlimited sexuality. So when you have those compromises there and you put that into law, or you make that a social norm where we say, okay, no sex before marriage, is it tenable? No, even back in the day, it wasn't really all that tenable, but I understand why it was a thing. Do I think that, I'm the one saying, hey, spin plates. If you're gonna have sex with, you're gonna date non-exclusively, you're gonna have sex with some of them, so be it, because it's untenable certainly in the 21st century, and certainly for at least the last half of the 20th century. And I'm not saying that, it wouldn't be a bad idea for guys to just sort of, back up off of it and want to wait for marriage, but it's simply not going to happen in this century right now. So I understand. I understand why it's there. I understand the logistics behind it, but I just simply think that prearranged marriage is untenable, and premarital sex, prescriptions against that are untenable today. So, but I get it. I understand why it's there.
No, I've heard you describe yourself as, at least at one point in time, being a Christian. Mm-hmm. Would you identify as that now, or?
I am, let's say, a Christ follower. And I know that sounds like really like wishy-washy, but the reason why I say, if you read my fourth book, the last chapter in there, I go into what my personal faith is really about and how I kind of came to it. And so I get, for lack of a better term, I don't know what I am, to be quite honest with you. Like, I'm not Pentecostal, I'm not Baptist, I'm not Catholic. I don't know what franchise I would technically belong to, but I am a Christ follower. I believe in the Bible. I believe in Jesus Christ. So yes.
Yeah. So one figure, important figure in the sort of Manosphere, red pill space, mm-hmm. PUAs sort of are, most of them have been very much influenced by him. Of course, is Rush V.
Mm-hmm.
Now, the interesting thing about Rush V is now Rush V is a devout Orthodox Christian. Mm-hmm. So this is an interesting.
Be specific.
Yeah. So this is an interesting thing. Now you can probably see this icon over this shoulder right here.
Mm-hmm.
I'm actually Orthodox also.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I think something that's interesting about the Orthodox Church is that all of this sort of gender bending and sort of making every role accessible to everyone, a lot of that stuff that has happened in Protestant churches in particular,
mm-hmm.
And especially evangelical churches, none of that stuff has had any impact or any effect at all. And so there are specific roles for men, and this is not in any way as a subjugation to women or anything. Matter of fact, the only second to Jesus is venerated his mother,
mm-hmm.
In the history of the church. And so it's not we're not talking about misogyny here, and we're not talking about subjugation. We're just talking about, here are specific roles, and in order to fill this role, these roles here, priests, bishops, those will be men. There's history in the church for some of the deacons were women.
Mm-hmm.
If you want to be a chanter, women do that, right? There's specifics about going behind the altar. Only men are allowed to go behind the altar, in the quote unquote holy of holy of the church, so there are these kinds of things. But But there's also, of course, women in certain kinds of leadership positions with respect to the business of the church, the administration of certain, ministries of the church, that kind of thing. And it's interesting because I don't hear the kind of squabbling about the about so-called sexism in Orthodoxy. It's just not something that the folks that are involved with it seem to be very satisfied with what's going on. Okay, now obviously you get to pick, so you could say, well, they picked that because they're okay with it. Other folks are not okay with it, so they go somewhere else. Maybe that's what the response is. But I think that the Orthodox thing is interesting because it's one of the last places where actually men have a place of reverence that is not going to be moved. What do you think of that? And
it's not going to be moved
maybe,
yet. I have once again, going back to my fourth book, one of the premises I set out in that book is that the feminine imperative has been co-opting and assimilating. That was one of the first things it started to do back in the 70s, really, is assimilating religions and religion in general. So like, in the broadest sense, Christianity, Judaism, and Islam too. And I think a lot of people have a real problem when I say, feminism and gynocentrism is working its way into Islam. A lot of people, when I was doing the book, I ran into what's called the Orthodox paradox. It's a term that I guess I coined. And the Orthodox paradox is that I'm in an Orthodox religion and that's not how things are. And you're not it doesn't have to be Orthodox Christian. It could be, Orthodox Islam or whatever as well. That's only a Western feminism thing, Rollo. It's not in my country, not in my religion. And through my research and through my studies for the book, you can see statistically how women are making inroads into certainly the governance of, if not the actual, going up and doing the rituals, certainly, as you were saying before, controlling the purse strings. Who's doing the spending for the church? Who's making the decisions for the church? Is it the men or is it the women? And in that case, what you may be following that religion, and it may be Orthodox now, but in another generation or two, is it? Or is it right now? I mean, religion in general has taken a hit. Most people, I think statistically speaking, there are more nuns now than ever. And I don't mean nuns like N-U-N, I mean nuns, N-O-N-E-S is how they're defined. And when I believe it was the last census, I think it was a 2020 census. If you go and you look at the incidence of people who are non-religiously aligned, it is skyrocketed in just the last decade. So and I'm not just talking about it, just across the board. This isn't just like, Christianity or any of these other religions. It's just people are you'll probably heard this before. I'm spiritual, but I'm not religious. They don't want to be affiliated with the religion, but they want to at least have the, maybe they're agnostic enough to say, well, I'm open to sort of spiritual ideas. And really what that means is they're open to just what, basically anything that sounds, spiritual, but it's not an organized religion. And then you've got the people who are in particularly mainstream Christianity right now, has been almost fully assimilated by the feminine imperative. And even when I have people who are just sort of devout evangelical Christians tell me, no, not in my church, I can point out figures and people who want to literally rewrite the Bible so that it's more modernized and it's gender neutral. And then, of course, what happens then is what's called the Orthodox paradox. And what really that is it's the no true Scotsman argument, which means that, well, they're not really Christians. They're not really part of my religion. And that wouldn't happen in my religion. The one true religion is the one that I'm a part of right now. And I don't see that happening. Well, you don't see that happening, but your kids do. Or the people who are like, what's the attrition rate of your Orthodox Christianity or Catholicism for that matter? Most missionaries are female today in Catholicism. You've got a pope right now who is essentially sort of like hipster pope, who is all good with, women's rights. And when it comes to International Women's Day, he's the first one out there. The Dalai Lama is very much into, the feminism. It's oddly enough, if you go and you look at like Krishnaism, which is, I guess, an offshoot, a major offshoot, I should say, of the Hindu religion. If you go and you look at, like, say, someone like Tulsi Gabbard is a Krishna. And Krishnaism is very popular amongst Western women now, because it has all the attraction of Christianity, but none of the judgment that comes along with sort of Old Testament Christianity. And so really what it is it, at least in my estimate, and from what I was able to, research for the book, it appears to me anyways, that there is a new religion, a new worldwide global religion that is forming, if not already formed. And it's the spiritual but not religious religion. Right. And so it's based on it's what I've called the goddess movement. It's all about love and tolerance, unless you're not on board, and then you're a hater. And there's a chapter in that book called Love is God rather than God is Love, which I'm sure you've heard of before. And so the reason why I say love is God is because we've elevated the emotional state of love to like cosmic God-like thing. So it's not enough. It's not enough to just worship a God. They're essentially worshiping love as their
experience.
Yes.
And relationship.
So when guys come to me and they say, I don't see this happening in my Orthodox church, whatever it is, I go, wait a generation, because those church enterprises have to find some way to survive. They have to, like I said, the attrition rate. There has to be more new believers. There has to be more kids born into that church. There has to be more people who follow those values. And that I would say that that's becoming increasingly more and more difficult as a result of gynocentrism and also globalization right now and global communication. So it's not enough that you're part of this very, exclusive, isolated Orthodox religion. Your kids, or maybe your people you're related to, or people who are in that church, are exposed to a worldwide global influence of spiritual but not religious. So my argument has always been this is even I've argued against Islam in this sense, is that that if you don't think feminism has moved into Islam or your Orthodox religion, give it a generation, give it 2 generations, and I will guarantee you that what happens is the secular influence of sort of feminism and gynocentrism works its way into the doctrine of that religion, meaning the practices, not necessarily reading the word or the belief, the intrinsic, really heartfelt, sincere belief. It's the doctrine, it's the practice, it's the ritual. This is how we do things in this church. That's how you get like franchises of Christianity. We do things differently here, but we all read from the same Bible, right? Well, the problem is that once that doctrine comes in, it aids in sort of sustaining that church. So whatever's commercially viable, which means, we celebrate women's rights here, or we allow homosexuals in here, even though our holy book says that we're not supposed to do that. Well, we can't sustain the church unless we change the practices to allow homosexuals in, or to allow women to be pastors or to be priests or whatever. And if we don't do that, we can't sustain the church commercially, because the doctrine won't allow that. So what happens is a secular influence comes in, it changes the doctrine, and then the doctrine in a generation or 2 rewrites the faith at that point. And so it rewrites that Bible to say, this is what the Bible really meant. And that's how we that's how we actually came to the doctrine, which was actually influenced by the secular influence. So unless it can survive economically, the religion is no longer sustainable at that point.
So I get that. I think the one point that I would push back a bit on that is so the idea of orthodoxy. So if you can actually show that there has been actually no change in doctrine since the very beginning in the early church, if you can actually show that we're talking about the same doctrines and hasn't mattered what has changed culturally. That would be my argument, is that, yes, I totally agree with you with respect to churches, that it seems that their structure is not just more amenable to, it's very much more impressionable, because they don't necessarily have continuity as a frame of reference. So if for instance, I mean, so there's like 30,000 Protestant denominations, probably more than that. I've been using 30,000 for the last 15 years. There's probably
franchises.
Yeah. There's probably 50,000, now. And the reason that you start a denomination or that you start a new church is because you are saying, I think that I'm doing this better than you, or I have a way of doing this that I believe is more specific to whatever this population is, or whatever it is. That's why you do that. You don't, otherwise you would just join another church that already existed, or you'd go through whatever their process was. Maybe you go to seminary for 3 years and then you say, okay, I dig what the Baptists are doing. I'm going to go over and do the Baptist thing. Right. But my point is that, if there is no continuity, if there is no, for instance, apostolic succession, if there's nothing that you can point to that at least shows some sort of tangible, sometimes some sort of concrete way that things should actually be interpreted, that's a general issue that I have with, for instance, evangelicalism, right? Because there's all this emphasis, as you said, on relationship and feeling, and Jesus is my personal savior. There's a lot of that sort of hyper personalizing this, and which makes it, I think, a lot more susceptible to any sort of anything that's happening in society is going to very quickly find itself infiltrating. Now, maybe I'm wrong, and maybe what you're saying is right, and in the next couple generations it's a different conversation. But at least thus far, I've not seen the sort of the kind of influence of Western society, as it were, feminism and all of that, in the doctrine. In the people, yes. In the people, yes, but not in the practice or the doctrine. So that would be my pushback to that.
I would,
because I got
the only thing I would, and now you know why I said I don't know where I fit in.
Oh, right.
now you understand. I have that's why I tried to explain that in the last chapter of the book. Was I have a faith, and I explained it in that book. But it's like when people go, well, what are you? Are you a Baptist? Are you a Methodist? Are you this? I'm like, I don't know, man. I really don't. I can tell you what I believe, and I can tell you what my core faith is. But I don't feel at home I went to a lot, when I was doing the research for the book, I went to a lot of churches, and I went to synagogue, for crying out loud. But it's like, my only argument against this would be that, again, it's the attrition rate. So when you look at the popularity of like these, you'll see what are called interfaith services right now. I used the example of what was called the Beyonce interfaith service that happened in San Francisco, and I think it was like 2017 or 2018. And no, Beyonce wasn't actually there, but what they did was, I believe it was a Catholic church, or it might have been Episcopalian, I'm not really sure, but the church was struggling, was floundering in San Francisco, and so they said, you know what, we're going to open the doors to all these faiths. It doesn't matter who it is, just come out here, and we're going to have the Beyonce interfaith service at this church on Sunday at this time, blah, blah, blah. And it doesn't matter if you're
Muslim, like Unitarian,
more or less Unitarian. Yes. Which I'm very familiar with, by the way. But it's different though. Like classic Unitarianism is just sort of like people who are just trying to find a religion until they, they're Unitarian until they decide, oh, okay, I'm going to be a Jew, or I'm going to be a Muslim or whatever. Whereas in this sense, it's everybody come together, and it's what Dr. Everett Piper gave me this word. It's called syncretism, and what it is, it's like it's like a gumbo of all these faiths and all these religions, and the only really defining part of this sort of interfaith, what I would say is a new world religion. It's the coming new world religion will be called love. That's what it's going to be. And that's really what when I saw the Beyonce, interfaith, because they played Beyonce on that thing, right? And of course it was standing room only. They had like people waiting outside. It was like a nightclub to get into this church so that they could go and sing and praise together. And it was this interfaith thing. And so it's all based on, sort of this communitarianism and syncretism. And it's not necessarily based on a particular holy book, one particular holy book. But that's what I'm saying is like, there's going to be, I see anyways, more and more people are going to be drawn into this global, because we're globalizing everything right now, including religion. And that religion is going to be globalized under the banner of like gynocentrism, under like, love and whatever emotionalism. And that's why I kept saying, love is being, the emotion of love is being elevated to the point of it that it's a God. And so we tend to think of our emotions as being sort of these magical cosmic things, when in fact, all they really are is they're right here. They're physical. They're part of us, is what they are. And so it's not some magical woo-woo, angelic thing. It's like you feel anger, you feel hate, you feel love, you feel all these things, because that's how human beings interpret our surroundings. But if we go and we elevate them up to these really kind of like, magical thinking capacities, that's when you get the Beyonce interfaith thing. That's when you get syncretism. That's when you get all this kind of stuff. And where it goes from there, I don't know. But as I was saying before, the Orthodox churches, Islam as well, are the last holdouts at this point, because people kept saying, Islam's the true red pill religion because men are men still, and largely so. But again, what's the attrition rate? How attractive is the Beyonce interfaith service going to be to your kids or your grandchildren? And how attractive is the Orthodox Church going to be to them? Or how attractive is Islam? Or how attractive is Hinduism? Or how attractive is any other religion in comparison to, hey, we're all going to get together and we're all going to be in love with each other and we're all just going to dance around and praise love, right? If that's more attractive, if that's a better commercial enterprise, if that's a better franchise than these pre-established religions, even the ones that gynocentrism couldn't infiltrate, those ones will die off in a generation or two as things sort of decay, because there's more attractive choices for spiritual but not religious.
Yeah, this is interesting.
I'm not saying it's a good thing, by the way. I'm just saying.
No. I know.
Writing on the wall that I'm looking at.
What's interesting is, it seems to me that it's growing in both directions. So when you look at the figures with respect to new converts, we'll talk about new Christian converts. What seems to be happening is the sort of evangelical Pentecostal, that is growing, but what's also growing is the sort of high church, which is a sort of strange dynamic. And if you look in the black community in particular, you still have some fire-breathing ministers that are sort of holdouts. And I'll cite one in particular, Geno Jennings, Philadelphia.
Sounds familiar.
Yeah, so Minister Jap frequently plays a clip of Geno Jennings, when he's going in on women's attire and stuff. They're going to church with this form fit and stuff, and they got
Sunday morning nightclub. That's what Dal Rock used to call it.
Yeah. And so, and he tells it how it is. And I'll tell you, that church is bursting at the seams. They got all the women on one side, all the men on the other side. It is packed, jam-packed. Well, one of the issues that I find in the black church is, and I've done a number of shows on this topic. I did a couple panel shows. I brought the pastors together and everything on O'Shea Duke Jackson's channel. And then I also did on Bernard Riley, on his channel did a couple of the same kind of panel shows, kind of nexus between the black church and the black manosphere kind of things, which is an interesting dynamic, especially in the black manosphere, where you have a lot of folks that it's as if they've been expelled from the black church, and the black manosphere is almost the only place that they can actually go where they could get a lot of the information, content, counsel, guidance, strong talk, get your money right, get your body right, stop being an idiot, this kind of straight talk that men tend to need. They're getting that from the black manosphere, where they were not getting that from the black church. Yep. Right. And so
I
this
talk
is
exactly just to interject real quickly. I talk exactly about that in religion. That was something that I noticed as far back as like 2013, 2012, 2013. And this is not in the black manosphere, because there really was no black manosphere back then. I mean, I think it's sort of a mistake to really sort of segregate the manosphere into like blacks and whites and Asians and Latinos. Is there a Latin manosphere? The reason why I say that is because I saw this happening I don't know if you're familiar with Dalrock's work, but as far as like the Christo manosphere is concerned, Dalrock's blog was like sort of the gold standard for that conversation. And we were discussing this as far back as like 2012. And what we were noticing then and now actually was that men were exiting the church in droves. And we were like, well, why is that? Well, the answer we came to was that there's nothing for men in any religion, right? Certainly not in Christianity right now, because Christian churches have become openly hostile to anything that is conventionally masculine, and they still are. If you go and you look at church attendance right now, it is primarily, in this case, now it's probably overwhelmingly female. So when you look at the who's making decisions, it's not necessarily the guy who's the pastor who's leading the church. It's who's making the decisions for the actual organization, the company that is that church. And it's primarily women, and it's by women, and it's for women. And as a result of that, we can't talk about single motherhood. We can't talk about any unflattering truth about women. And we certainly can't talk about the things that are like, that would in any way put a damper on women in that church, because women are primarily where the money is coming from at that point. They're the ones who are putting butts in the pews. And so as a result of that, they sorry, I got this. Who's calling me right now? But as a result of that, we have guys who are exiting the church. And again, when I was doing the research for the book, I was thinking, okay, well, where are people coming? Where are the men actually coming from in the church? Well, they're either born into it, their families were part of the church and they're also part of the church, or they were married outside the church and their wives brought them into the church. Single men who are unchurched men, church is the last place that they want to go, even if it's singles ministry, or they don't have any really sort of spirit-filled quest to actually seek out an actual church, because they got other things going for them at the time. But then they have that aspect of men not wanting to go to church unless they're dragged there by their wives, or they're born into it and their families are putting them there. The other part is that the men who were there are leaving because there's nothing for them there. And they're treated like they're patronized. They're treated as if they are the ridiculous, Homer Simpson kind of, daddy who needs mommy to save him from himself attitude that's going on. And so at that time, we were noticing all these people, all these men who were leaving the church, and where were they going? And to your credit, exactly what you said, they're going to the manosphere. They were coming to us. They were coming to me. They were coming to Dalrock. They were going to anywhere else where they could find men congregating. And so what happened, consequently, is that the men who exited those churches found the manosphere, because maybe they had gone through a divorce or whatever, and their church didn't have their back when they were going through a divorce. The women of the church, of course, have this huge network of support for the divorced wife, but for the guy, there's no base of support for that guy. As a matter of fact, there's a lot of ridicule, there's a lot of shame, there's a lot of guilt, there's a lot of blame to go around, but there's no support. And so when those guys were leaving the church, like I said, there's really nothing there for them. And so as a result of that, they're looking for they're looking for a tribe. They're looking for other men to sort of like, congregate and talk about these kinds of things. And where did they go? They went online to online forums, my blog, to YouTube, to anywhere where the Manosphere was happening at that time. And so what I saw happen, and maybe you saw this too, is that you saw some guys who were part of, like, say, an evangelical church or wherever. And what they would do is they go, where are all the men? What happened to all the guys? And what happened is those guys who were wanted to be sort of men's ministry leaders or whatever, they found that all these guys have gone to the Manosphere. So what they did was they turned the Manosphere into their sort of like personal ministry because they wanted to drag them all back to the church. That came to a head, by the way, as soon as Jordan Peterson became popular in 2017, 2018. And so everyone thought he was the great white hope, right? They thought he was going to lead all these men, all the men who had left the church and entered the Manosphere. Jordan Peterson was going to lead them back into the church. And isn't that a good thing, Rollo? And I was like, no, because I'm looking at this and it seems to me that Jordan is just in the right place at the right time. And he's not necessarily a religious figure. He's a psychologist, for crying out loud. Give him his due, but he's not the guy that was going to bring all these guys back into the church, because the church has been openly hostile to anything masculine for so long. I heard, and I'm sure you did too, I remember when Kevin Samuels was talking about men leaving the church or like bring, he wanted to bring the black community back together and they want to start.
Yeah. I was going to mention that. Yep.
Yeah. So I remember that because it came out right at the same time that I published my book on religion, saying pretty much the same thing that he was getting into. He catered that message to the black community. So to his credit, good. But when I was looking at that, you can't really address the sort of gender divide in whatever church it is. You can't address that until you address why it is that the men were leaving in the first place. And so until we can say, okay, ladies, you're going to hear some really uncomfortable truths here, right? Your pride, your hubris, your the way you dress, whatever it is, that's religion. You're going to be judged. It is judgmentalism. In the Bible, that's going to be judgmental. Quran, that's going to be judgmental. You're going to have to deal with the fact that you're going to be judged. And so, and I don't mean like judge in the spirit, godly sense. I mean just judgmentalism as it is. And I think that this society is just simply not prepared. Females in particular are not prepared for that. They don't want judgmentalism.
Yeah. I think people make they misunderstand what the Bible is talking about when it uses certain terms. Judge is one of those terms. So there's judges.
They simply don't want to have to. If anything, it's men's sin that they want to focus on, and they don't want to look at women's sin. And by sin, I mean like just whatever their behaviors happens to be. So we'll have. I think one of the reasons why women are drawn particularly to Christianity is the forgiveness aspect of Christianity, because they get to the phase where they're like 29, 30, 31 years old. They're single mothers, whatever, and they want to sort of like get right with God. And the forgiveness aspect of Christianity really appeals to them.
Yeah, I think the judge thing is more fundamental than just who is going to get judged. They just don't want to be the one getting judged. I think it's actually more fundamental than that. And that is just a misunderstanding of what actually is being said, like what the words that are used actually mean. So, because, for instance, Jesus says you judge a tree by its fruit. So there's a judge right there. And that's actually the kind of judge that we're talking about. We're not talking about you're condemned to hell. That's a different kind of judging. And I think what people do is they conflate those two things. And so when it says, well, you can't judge, only God can judge. Well, that's right. Only God can judge your eternal, the state of your soul. That's true. But when we talk about making decisions, evaluating things, making assessments about people's character based on their behavior, that's something that is totally condoned and is something that we're actually encouraged to do. You judge a tree by its fruit. Mm-hmm.
So I'm of the opinion right now, and this is not even a religious thing. I think societally right now, we need to be more judgmental. When you call it judgmental, whatever, we certainly need to be more discerning, And we certainly need to, like I was saying before, with the, my example of the Tinder swindler thing, if a man had stepped in to say, no, you're not getting on that private plane, no, you're not going to do those things, because I'm not going to be I'm not going to sort of clean up your mess, because you're making some very foolish, bad decisions. If a guy were,
I'm not going to be your stepdaddy clean up.
Exactly. And so I don't want to bear the brunt or the consequences of your bad actions when you need me to sort of like do a Kickstarter so I can pay off the bad debt that you took out for this guy, right? And we should all be sympathetic for you. No, we shouldn't. You should pay that off, because it was a very foolish decision. And if I were that woman's father, or if I was that, an invested male in that woman's life, and if I were to step in and do that, I would be called judgy. I would be called judgmental. And you will hear women repeat this constantly. And I don't, whether you know them or you hear this kind of stuff in dialogue on like Netflix or whatever, when women are talking or when men are talking, the women will say, oh, I've never judged you, and it's all about love, and follow your heart. It'll never lead you astray. And if anybody has a problem with you being, live your truth, girl. And it doesn't matter if your truth is completely, entirely contradictory to the Bible. It doesn't matter what, you can still call yourself a Christian, because you're living the dream kind of thing, rather than encouraging that and reinforcing that in the narrative in society right now. I think we need to be more judgmental. I think men need to be you want to start, like I always talk about, like responsibility versus authority. And you probably heard me talk about that before. Guys go, well, where do I start with this authority thing, Rollo? I go, you start being more judgmental. You start being more discerning. And I don't mean you have to be like some judgy asshole. I'm just saying you have to be like, you have to say, look, that you have to be willing to step up and say, whether you're invested in that person or not, tell that woman no. Or you go and you say, that's a really stupid idea, and do so fearlessly and unapologetically. Because if you don't, you will be bearing the brunt, or somebody like you is going to be bearing the brunt of the downstream effects of those bad decisions. The reason why men don't speak up is because they fear to be judgy. They fear to step on her feet. They fear to hold women accountable. And if you want to know why Kevin Samuels was so successful and Fresh and Fit, and even myself and the rest of these guys who are going out there to like sort of break down, like even the guys who are just doing these, quick hit videos about women on TikTok, the reason those channels like blow up is because they're saying something that no other guy is saying right now. They're talking about, they're holding women's feet to the fire in some limited sense or some greater sense. And the people, like guys like Kevin Samuels, the reason why he was so hated even after his death, and I could not believe the amount of vitriol that was thrown at him. The reason for that is because he was judgmental. He told the truth. He told the unflattering truth about these women. And that goes against the doctrine of not being judgy, not being judgmental, because we can't tell women no. We can't tell women no. You're sinning. This is bad behavior. This is a bad decision. This is foolishness. I can't believe you're going to do this kind of stuff. And if you can't do that in church, if you can't do that in society, how can you do that in church? That's what I'm saying here. And I think
I got you.
We can sort of figure that out as guys, and maybe if you want to make a cultural shift, if you want to progress the Black Manosphere or the Black community further, you need to tell men, don't be unapologetically judgmental of women, because they need to hear it. Because if they don't hear it, you will pay the price for it. She will pay the price for it. Your kids will pay the price for it. And God knows who else is going to pay the price for it, because they want to be absolved of what could have been headed off at the past had you been more judgmental.
Yeah. Now, I think I agree with that. I mean, I agree with that.
And I'm going to sound like an asshole and a misogynist and a chauvinist for saying something like that. We're 65 years into 60 years past the sexual revolution. These are the results of the experiment. These are the results of giving women carte blanche since 1965. And at some point, if you want to course correct, well, we have to look at the results and what caused those things. And we have to say, where do we go wrong? Honestly, it's like we could have headed off all of these bad decisions, or like I said, the downstream effects, had we just stepped in and said, no, you're not going to do that.
Yeah, but Rollo, that's not very pastoral.
Oh yeah, I'm sorry.
It's not very pastoral. Anyhow, I just want to. So here, I want to jump through a couple of these. Yeah, I want to jump through a couple of these questions from, like I said, from Obsidian, from BGS, and from Green Gorilla. In let's see here. So BGS asked a question about your famous sexual marketplace value diagram, and how did that come about?
Okay, so the sexual market value diagram I produced in 2014, and no, actually it was before that. I think maybe it was 2012, and I was originally doing it because somebody had jokingly asked me to do a commencement speech for a college, and so I was like, okay, what would I tell kids? It wasn't really serious, but like I think it was like in May or something of that year. And so I made a graph, and I said, okay, here's what you can expect, because I had so many people saying, Rollo, I love your stuff. I wish I would have known this stuff sooner, because then I would have made different decisions. Then I would have not got married, or I would have waited, or I would have had kids later or sooner or whatever. I wouldn't have taken that job or moved to that, gone to that college, taken that major had I known these things beforehand. And so I was like, okay, I created a timeline, by the way, for the second book, but the first book had the infamous graph. And in there, I peg women's sexual market value peak years at 23, and I peg men's at about 36. And oddly enough, and I had no idea of this at the time, this just seemed like instinctive to me at that time, but I didn't realize that Aristotle there's a quote from Aristotle that says the best time for men to marry is at 36, and the best time for women to marry is at 18. Now, granted, this was way back in Aristotle's time, so 18 is when women were topping out at that point. But it was close enough to what I was sort of had a hunch about at that time. And so I plotted it out, and I put out, okay, so I started at age 15, by the way, and people gave me grief about that because they think suddenly, oh, you're going for underage girls. No, the reason I put it at 15 to start is because I had high school boys curious about red pill stuff. So that's why I said, okay, well, let's just start at 15. That seems like a good round number. So I started there, and that's when young teenage girls and boys start taking notice. At the very least, they start taking notice of each other at about 15 years old. And then I took the chart out all the way out to like, I think 50 or 70 or something. And I plotted it out in the sense that women's sexual market value, their real agency years are 22, 23, 24 years old. And that happened, again, I didn't know this at the time, happened to coincide with a lot of the data in a book called Dataclysm. And Dataclysm was a collection of data sets by the guy who was the founder of OkCupid, and I think Match.com too. But they collected this data and they put it together. And one of the charts that they had was the age at which men and women are the most attractive to the opposite sex. So first chart, of course, was for women, which tracked pretty well with the statistics. Women tend to find men more attractive anywhere between 3 to 7 years older than they are, depending on where they are, like in their stage of life. So, like a woman who's like, say 23 or 22 finds a guy who's like 25 to 27 or 28 most attractive. And it tracked with the data sets that they had. And so, like, say if a woman's 30, then she's looking for a guy who's between 33 and 37. At least that's the age at which the man appears to be most attractive according to dating profiles and what they were looking for and like what their prerequisites were in those profiles. For men, it was different. So when women are like 30, 40, and as it would stagger up, 3 to 7 years for women at various ages. For men, it fixated on 1 year, and that is 23 years old. So men who are 18 all the way up to like 70 all found women of the age of about 22 to 24. So I rounded, mean average is 23. Found 23-year-olds the most attractive at every stage of a man's life. That's the age at which men find women the most attractive. And of course, my joke was this: is that they named the store Forever 21, not Forever 41, for a reason. And so that's, it tracked pretty well with the graphs I was pointing out. And a lot of people took me to task, and they said, well, this guy doesn't know what he's talking about. He's not a statistician. He's not a psychologist. He's not a sociologist. But over the years, since like 2012-ish, when I put it out, I've had other people throw data sets at me over the course of that time from, really 10 years now. So we look at like Hollywood actors and what their longevity is, like the male longevity versus women, like female actresses' longevity. And of course, their peak years 23, 24, 25 years old, and it drops off right there. For men, it's a much more gradual bell curve. And so that's one thing. There's all kinds of other like correlating like data that sort of like corroborates what I was just sort of, instinctually, talking about at that time. So it's been sort of vindicated, I think, over the last like 10 or 12 years. But again, you have to remember that men and women have different criteria for what makes them the most attractive. And so for men must become and women just are. So when I say men around the age of 36-ish are usually, it takes longer for men to mature into their peak potential, to have the most of what makes men attractive. It takes longer for men to achieve that than it does for women to attain what makes women the most attractive to men. So that's why when we talk about how men are only fixated really on was unlimited access to unlimited sexuality, but that also prioritizes youth, younger, hotter, tighter, right? It's fertility, youth, beauty, hourglass figure, anything that sort of correlates with fertility. That's what men are. That's their primary focus, their primary requisite. I'm not saying that that's all there is. I'm just saying that's their primary focus. For women, they've got to be hot. They've got to have a V taper. They've got to have like a chiseled jawline, but that's not enough. That's the alpha seed side of hypergamy. He also has to be funny. He also has to have a lot of money. He has to be ambitious. He's got to have drive. He's got to love his mama. He's got to want kids. He's got to like puppy dogs. He got to want to take me to the clubs. He's got to want to do like on and on and on and on and on. Well, a man doesn't have the potential to have all of that until he matures into it and he earns it or he builds it over the course of years. And so that's why I said when guys hit 36, that's when they're hitting their stride and they have their most sexual selectivity right around the 36, 37 years. He made partner in the law firm. He's a surgeon now. He's got his own business, but he's still in good shape and he still looks good. And he's still as Kevin said, a high value man. The likelihood of him achieving that is usually right around 36 years old. For women, 23 years old. And that's why I do this. Now, the curious thing about this is that as women are on their decline right around 29 and men are on their ascendancy at 29 or 30 to get up to the 30 or 36, there's a point at which both of those ages meet where the woman is on her declination and he's on his ascension to his. And that's happens to be what I call the epiphany phase, which is 29 to 31 years old. And that's when women seek to cash out of the sexual marketplace. Some people will call it the cock carousel, but it's that point at which women want to get right with God and they're done with the jerks and they had their hoe phase, right? Between 18 and 28 years old. And that's when they want to settle down, find the right guy. They want to do things right, make him jump through these hoops. As he's on his way to his peak sexual selectivity, they're hoping to find a guy who's still dumb enough to, want to get with a woman who's on her way, on her declination out of the sexual marketplace while he's on his ascension to his. And oddly enough, that's when the average age of first marriage occurs right in the United States, 30 for men and 28 for women. Another shocking coincidence, but that's exactly where that happens. And so another thing that corroborates that graph, I guess.
That's great. I think he'll be satisfied with that rather detailed response. Thank you very much for that. And let's see here. I've got a question from Green Gorilla. So his question is it possible for black men and white men to come together like black women and white women do in developing a male-centered political movement? Mm-hmm. What are your thoughts?
I think there should be. As I was saying before, I don't think I've been doing this for 20 years. I was doing this before we even called it the Manosphere. I dug this out when I was a moderator on a forum called So Suave for over a decade, really 12 years, from like 2002 to like 2013 or 2014. I was even a moderator on there. And we had all these conversations. And I can remember the first time I even used the term red pill, and it was like in 2004. And so this has sort of been this developmental thing. And even back then, we didn't really, there was no racial lines. We didn't even know who was white and who was black because we didn't have video, we didn't have avatars or anything like
right.
that. It was like sort of whatever the icon was. So I didn't know who we were talking about, unless you expressly said, yeah, I'm Indian, I'm Hindu, or I'm black, I'm this, whatever. You didn't know. And that's kind of like, to me anyways, that's sort of like the golden era of the Manosphere, because there was like sort of, it was like, it was not racial, it was not tribal, it was just guys getting together and comparing notes, which I thought was a thing of beauty at the time. But now, you know, the Black Manosphere really is something that's I saw developing right around 2017, 2018 into what it is right now. And I think I think it is a step backwards to turn it into a tribal thing. And human beings are, you know, humans in general are human nature anyways, is tribalistic. So we're always going to have our tribes, whether that's your racial tribe, whether that's your family, whether that's your nation or your religion or your politics or whatever. Everybody's got a tribe. You're your sports team, man. You know, I like the, you know, the Golden Knights. Right? So that's my tribe when they're playing, you know, in Vegas. But I think it's especially for men, we do ourselves a disservice because we're already at a disadvantage in sort of our solidarity when it comes to like the Manosphere as it is. I keep seeing this all the time. Like I get rocks thrown at me from the Black Manosphere, or I get flowers thrown at me from the Black Manosphere, and vice versa. You know, for the white man, whatever the white Manosphere is, I have no idea, but I don't think it's a black or a white or a Latino or an Asian thing. I think it's a masculine thing. I think it's a male thing. You know, I don't care what tribe you're from. You know, if you're a Viking and you go and you know, in the old days and you went down and you met some tribal warlord from Africa or something like that, the alpha male recognizes the alpha male, right? I mean, you just that nod, right? You know what you're all about. There's a sort of this masculine understanding between men, but we don't really, we've been sort of atomized really in, like I said, in this globalization, that we want to turn things into a black issue or a white issue or a racial issue. I don't think that that's what it's about, man. And I think that we do ourselves a disservice because women are innately communitarian. They're the berry pickers, right? They're the gatherers and men were the hunters. Men tend to be naturally more hierarchical, right? So there's the admiral and the corporal, or the admiral and the lieutenant and the corporal, and on down the chain of command down to the private, right? We tend to think of things in terms of, okay, you have more value, so you get more pay, or you have more status because you can do these things, or you're more respectable, or you have more integrity, whatever the criteria is. Men tend to work in hierarchies. Women tend to work in circles. They tend to work in like communitarianism. They tend to be more egalitarian when it comes to like dividing resources, and men tend to like reward performance, where women will go one for you and one for you and one for you and one for you. And oh, Sherry, you're pregnant. Here's two for you and one for you. And it's this want for this equality and this egalitarianism, whereas men tend to think in terms of who's better than who. It's more competition, and that's just simply the nature of our, you know, our human nature as men. So women are already on team woman. It's what I call the sisterhood uber alles. It doesn't matter what politics they are. It doesn't matter what religion they are. It doesn't matter what color they are. It doesn't matter what ethnicity they are. Women always have the woman card. We're always this oppressed class. We're always victims. We're always women. So we're all on team woman, right, girl? And so I make this joke quite often, is like, you know, if you take like women who have like really differing politics or something, like you take like Gretchen Carlson, you take like, I don't know, Rachel Maddow, who are like, would fight like cats and dogs if you put them together. And we're talking about politics, but then you put Rollo Tomassi in the room and you start talking gender, they lock arms and they have solidarity between the two of them, because now it's a gender issue. And it doesn't matter what their politics were. If you're the misogynist in the room, they're going to try to, you know, give you your just desserts, because team woman versus team man. Well, the problem I see with this, you know, Black Manosphere, white Manosphere, whatever, is we're still dealing with the hierarchical nature of men. So men are very hard to unite, much harder to unite than women, because women have that sort of innate gender understanding that we're the victims and we need to band together, and there's strength in numbers and we're a community. For men, if you want to put solidarity between men, you have to put purpose in there. You have to have a purpose. And I don't care what color you are. I don't care what ethnicity, whatever. If men united in a common purpose will find solidarity. And if you can do that, like you want to talk about the great uniters of the past, they've all done exactly that. They've had the men that they unite had a common purpose that they all believed in and they were all part of. And that has never been more difficult to do than in the data age. In fact, I would argue that social media and what we're doing right now, it atomizes men while it unites women at the same time, because women are the communicators. They're the ones who they send more tweets, they say more words, they do more. They're better at communicating. Like certainly have different aspects of communication. Men, on the other hand, we're always potential rivals. And so you have to find some common purpose, like, okay, this is the job we have to get done. When Jordan Peterson talks about the lost boys generation, the reason why those guys are lost is not because they're searching for meaning or something out in the stars or the cosmos. It's they don't have any purpose. They have zero purpose. And so they need to find something to do. Men communicate best when they're working together on a project. And so you're never going to have solidarity between the black manosphere and the white manosphere until everybody can get together and say, this is where we're going. This is the direction that we're going to guide the bus, right? And this is the purpose that we have. And until you can focus, you get all these guys to focus on one purpose, you're never going to have solidarity because everybody's competing with each other. And especially when those guys online have their own brands that compete with other guys who have their own brands as well. So until you can unite men of all tribes under a common purpose, you're never going to have solidarity. So that's, I think, that's a conversation I think really needs to take place in the manosphere in general right now. So when I go on Fresh and Fit, I'm the white guy on Fresh and Fit, but I'm also part of the manosphere, and people respect me as the godfather of the manosphere, at least the white godfather of the manosphere. And so I'm there, and I mentioned this, and I'll end with this, is I was talking to Myron, and I said, it's kind of, to me, it's kind of depressing or kind of sad that there are shows that I get invited to, like I'll go on The Blaze, or I'll go to PBD, or I'll go to, other shows that I can go to, but Myron and Fresh aren't going to get invited to that. And then there's shows like Flagrant 2 or Mike Rashid, who I have a lot of respect for Mike Rashid. I'd love to go on his show, but I'm never going to get that invite. But Myron and Fresh can go there, and they're good representatives of the manosphere and the red pill in general on those shows. I look forward to the day when both Myron and I can be on the same show, when we can go on and speak our piece together, not as like a black guy and a white guy, but as two guys that are part of the manosphere and part of the red pill, and united in the purpose of that interview or whatever it is. That is going to be a good day when we can do. That's when you'll know that it's not a black or a white thing. It's a manosphere thing in general.
That's great, man. Thank you for that response. And man, I have a bunch of other stuff listed, and we're not going to be able to get to it. So, which means I'm going to have you back sometime.
Sure.
So we can talk about them. But I do want to have you just say maybe a few thoughts about this whole Roe v. Wade situation.
I just did a full show on it yesterday.
Well, the leaked information, this sort of the doxing of the judges. Speaking of doxing, Elle Magazine tried to dox me. I don't know if you saw that article.
Elle Magazine?
Yeah, it was. So Elle Magazine, Nicole Young wrote an article. Mumia Obsidian Ali was interviewed by her for this, but she basically, and she did all the usual stuff, misogynists, incels. She did all the same name calling, but I got mentioned in there. It almost seems like totally out of context, because I think I've been talking to folks in the manosphere. I'm just willing to have the conversation. So, I mean, if you look at, by the way, this is going to be episode 200. So that's great. But I have interviewed a lot of musicians. I've interviewed politicians in YouTube personalities, and all kinds of folks. And it maybe for the last 5 minutes, I've been, regularly collaborating with folks in the Manosphere for mutual goals. But she described me as being someone that was on the on the edge of the Manosphere or something, beckoning men to come in.
You're an
something,
enabler.
like I'm right, like I'm some sort of like,
you're the gateway drug to the Manosphere.
right. And I'm like, well, obviously she didn't do any research on me. She just saw I was a professor, at Ohio State, so she threw that in there, tenured professor, and like this. And that's right, I'm here for the smoke. I'm willing to have a conversation, and one of the things I've been really disappointed with, I'm a tenured professor. Mm-hmm. One of the things that's attractive about academia is the original purpose of university, unity in diversity, right? You put all of these diverse, skills, disciplines together, and you say, okay, now let's try to find that quintessence, right? That fifth essence. Let's try to figure out what's uniting earth, air, fire, water, right? Let's see what's happening here. And so then you can have these sort of interesting conversations, and you don't have to agree on stuff. And matter of fact, sometimes it's contentious, but you're getting to something. It's new information. It's like, oh, I wonder what it would be like if a musician collaborated with an engineer on this thing, or if a doctor, collaborated with
the marketplace of ideas. Yeah.
Right. So this is a large reason why I was attracted to the academy, why I wanted to be professor, because I really enjoy conversation. But I have to say I've been very disappointed that much of the time I basically, in every meeting and every situation that I find myself in, I'm clearly aware of the topics that I must not discuss than I am of the ones that I would be interested in discussing, right? Because so part of the reason for this interview series, which actually started right after the pandemic started in March of 2020, is because I was hungry for having these conversations, to be able to talk to folks and that have different positions, different views and stuff like on things. But I'm here for the smoke. So, I don't have FU money, but I do have FU tenure.
Not yet. Well, I mean, and that's a good thing. I'll tell you that something that is, I know that when I was just talking about purpose and uniting men in a purpose, I think we're going to get to a point where, like you were saying before, you're so focused on what not to say that you don't know what you can say. At some point, you're just going to say, screw it. I'm just going to go say what I'm going to say. I think one of the reasons I lock horns with some like sort of tenured professors, like say Jordan Peterson, Dr. David Buss, Rob Henderson, but like I think a lot of the reasons why I get flack from them occasionally as being sort of this Manosphere, guy, is because I'll ask the questions they're not allowed to because they fear losing tenure, or they fear like the backlash or getting canceled or whatever. I mean, even Dr. Pinker was going to get canceled. And I don't like ideologically, I certainly don't align with Dr. Pinker, but I still think he's a brilliant, researcher, and I've used his stuff quite often. But again, a guy like me, and maybe a guy like you, can say things or connect dots that other people aren't allowed to, that we still need to have that conversation. And you have to be bold enough and unapologetic enough to go out there and say, you know what, I'm going to risk offending this person for the sake of having a good argument. And I think that it was, and then of course, coming to a truth, coming to an empirical truth as a result of that. I think it was Jordan Peterson when he was talking with Kathy, what's her face, the reporter from the BBC or whatever. He said, you know what, you have to risk being offensive to have a correct, critical analysis, to have a correct, to talk about something. And that's going to offend. And if you're not offending, in fact, that's probably a bad sign, because it means you're fearful of doing that. I think about that, and I think about like how we have, you want to know why we have like such a high incidence of these lost boy guys, like I was saying before, these purposeless dudes, is like, I asked this question once of Robert Kiyosaki, and I said, we'll talk in these conversations about like how colleges are these indoctrination camps now, and they're turning into communists, and the women will go in as traditional, young women, and they'll come out, looking like Lena Dunham, right, with purple hair and under armpit hair, and then raging feminists because they transform in 4 years. And so we kind of come down on academia, and you're a professor as well. I mean, you got your teacher. And so my question to Robert was like, okay, where do men go to be educated? We're already looking at like the enroll college, like higher education, right? Like we're looking at the enrollment rates of women, which is like 60, almost 65%, and men are at like 40 to 35%, depending on whose numbers you're looking at right now. And fewer men are entering into higher education, and most of them are not even really entering into trades or anything else. They just simply ambitionless, and they're the Lost Boys guys, right? They're happy to sit at home with porn and World of Warcraft and do just what's barely the bare minimum to survive and pay rent, and just like go MGTOW or go Black Pill or go whatever Doom Tao, whatever they're calling it right now, and really not doing much with themselves. And they become sort of these purposeless, rudderless guys in life. And at the same time, we're still saying don't go to college because it's useless. You'll get a useless degree, and it's just a lot of money, and you'll take out these student loans, and you already be starting life at a disadvantage. And so we say don't go learn, because there's no education to be found in the universities. And so my question was like, where do guys get educated? Where do men get a proper education? And I don't mean in terms of like, finding skills to get a new job. You can go do that in a trade school. What I'm saying is, how do you get a well-rounded education that makes you a more intelligent person, that allows you to speak knowledgeably on a great many different topics? How do you develop creativity? How do you develop innovation? How do you develop all of the critical thinking skills that college and academia used to teach, but no longer does? Where are those guys going to go? And the answer to that is they come to the internet. They come to guys like you, and they come to guys like me, and they come to guys like Kevin Samuels, and they come to guys like Fresh and Fit, because they're looking for something. And we just happen to have the particular interest that they're in. They might want to go learn how to, I don't know, hang drywall or learn, something else, but they're looking for, they're still men, like young men particularly, but men are looking for mentors. They're looking for tutors. They're looking for masters to which they can be the apprentice and learn something from, but they're not finding it in school. But who's teaching them? I don't have a degree in teaching. You have a degree in teaching. I mean, I got a degree in psychology, and I have a degree in a Bachelor of Fine Arts, but I'm not in any way teaching at an academic level. But yet people are coming to me and asking me for advice, and asking me for, I don't say advice, they're asking me for analysis, and I give it to them. Or they're going to Aaron Clarey and they're talking about economics and minimalism and stuff, or whatever their interest happens to be. And so they're getting this education, but who are they getting this education from is what I was sort of pointing at in all of that. But I think it's kind of tragic right now, because the institutions that were supposed to educate us, and not just train us for a job, but to educate us, not in what to think, but maybe how to think, or maybe in history, or maybe in English, whatever it is. And guys are simply not going and doing that anymore. And who's teaching them is us, you, me. The fathers, the dad they never had, the mentors they never had. And I think that that's a great responsibility that most guys certainly in the Manosphere, I don't think they fully appreciate right now. Man, I'm 50. I just turned 54 in April. And I look at this, and when people come up to me and they're talking to me like I'm like their uncle, right? Like Kevin Sava calls me his uncle, right? So I accept that role, but it's like now I can at least appreciate that, and I'm kind of concerned that a lot of people who come off as teachers or come off as gurus or whatever, Jedi masters, don't realize that that's what the people who are following them or giving them the likes on Instagram or whatever think of them as. And we have to that's a great commission. It's a great responsibility. And I don't think enough guys really appreciate that at this stage. So, and I don't know where it's going. You know, we're in a post-marriage society, as you were saying before. You know, what do you think of marriage and everything else? That's another thing people have to be educated about. They have to be educated about like men's nature and women's nature. And I don't think enough people really realize that people who are teaching this, you know, God, I hope Kevin Samuels was, but he was a teacher. Did he appreciate the fact that, you know, all these guys who are just looking to him as the dad they never had? Was that something he went to the grave with? I don't know. But I think that the people who want to get into this really better understand that before they go, you know, whole hog and quit their day jobs and become teachers online.
Well, Rollo, I thank you so much again for a great conversation, so much information. And like I said, I've been following you for a long time. And when I started down my path of interviewing several of the folks, in particular in the Black Manosphere, but like I've interviewed Donovan Sharp a couple times, and Solo TV 84, and O'Shea Duke Jackson, the lead attorney. I'm forgetting a bunch. It's almost about 30 interviews that have been. When I started down that sort of path and started making connections, you were someone that was at the top of the list of folks that I wanted to have this kind of conversation with. So I really thank you for.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
So, yeah. Well, and I think, and it was sort of, you know, it's great. You know, I noticed you started following me on Instagram, and I'm like, uh-oh.
I started following you on Instagram because I like the way you played, like, what, 5-string bass. I was like, what's that got me in. I came for your musicianship, and I stayed for the conversation.
So that's great. So I really appreciate it. And
you play a lot of instruments too, man. You play like clarinet, you play saxophone. Like, is there any wind instrument you don't play?
Well, I mean, I have a trumpet in here, but I don't actually really play the trumpet. I mean, I can get some notes out of it. It's something that I keep sitting around because I'm trying to make myself eventually, okay, now it's time to play, you know. But saxophone, flute, clarinet, those are the instruments I've been playing the longest. Mm-hmm. My professorship is, you know, I'm director of jazz studies. Mm-hmm. I'm professor of jazz saxophone. So that's if I had to say what my primary instrument was, I'd say probably saxophone, flute, clarinet.
Can I ask you a question before we go? Have you ever seen the movie Whiplash?
Yes, I have.
What did you think? What did you think of that movie as a musician, and what did you think of it in terms of like Red Pill and teaching, like the older generation teaching the younger generation?
Yeah. So I'll tell you. So I knew that the movie existed, of course. My gut instinct was, I can wait for this. I don't need to see it right away. But my students, they kept asking me questions about it. And I have sort of a general policy. If they're going to be asking me about it, then I should go watch it. So then I can actually talk to them about it. And so it was my plan to watch it. But what sort of slowed me down in that process is my dad, who, by the way, he was a great saxophone player. And he was my teacher. I started playing saxophone when I was 6. And I'm 47 now, so I've been playing for 41 years. And he was my teacher all the way until I went to college. Mm-hmm. And he calls me. He says, "Have you seen this movie Whiplash?" and I said, "No, I haven't seen it yet, but you know, as my students have been talking about it, I think I will see it." He says, "Man, I started watching that movie. I had to turn it off right away." Because he thought it was the premise was so ridiculous that basically you just browbeat people, throw stuff at folks, you know,
gotta watch the whole thing,
cuss them out, and then that's how you create real musicianship. And you know, it's by now I did actually watch the movie, and yes, there is some of that way over the top stuff, but it's a movie, and I think sometimes you have to use hyperbole to make the point.
Right.
I thought there was some valuable stuff in the movie. For instance, the dinner that the guy has with his girlfriend's family,
Yes.
and they're grilling him, about how is this going to be viable, lifestyle, how are you going to make any money being a musician?
If I become Buddy Rich, it will.
Yeah, right.
Uh-huh.
So I thought that was interesting. That whole sort of, I guess that was toxic masculinity. The dude throwing a chair at him in rehearsal, and that sort of trying to create a fear in him to make him improve. This whole playing until his hands are bloody. All of that kind of stuff is like, I mean, I went to, I'm Dr. Thunder. I actually have a doctorate. So I've been in school for a long time. I know what actually happens in these programs, and I haven't seen a lot of that. So.
Oh yeah, of course. I don't think it was necessarily meant to be like realistic, but I think the message.
Yeah. Right,
I like them. I really like the movie simply because it hit me at the right time. And like I was telling you before, like at the beginning of this, I mean, if you want to cut this part out, that's fine. But like at the beginning of the show, I was telling you like the band that I was in, that I am in right now. I've been in it for 2 years or 2.5 years. And the guys that I play with, this one guy is 25 years old, by the way, probably one of the best guitarists I've ever known. And the drummer is easily the most technically proficient, best drummer I've ever worked with. And I'm not just pulling this, blowing sweet sunshine out of him. It's because he has a commitment to excellence. And CJ, my co-collaborator, and of course, Libby's the singer. She has a commitment to excellence, and she had to, really. We have a dedication. We're not a garage band. We stayed, we put in our hours. We have a dedicated rehearsal studio. We have a schedule, and we are for all intents and purposes professional musicians. Although we're not getting a lot of money out of it, but we do it because we love it. And there was a point. I learned a very valuable, like at my age, I learned a very valuable lesson from Steve, who's the drummer. And I auditioned for the gig 2 years ago. And I thought, I'm like, oh God, I'm in no way good enough to be playing with these guys. But Steve said, well, come back. I'll teach you some stuff. And I want you to stick with it. And I was like, okay. I'm going to commit to this, or I'm not going to commit to either. I'm not going to go in there, or I'm going to go in and I'm going to do it for good. I'm going to do my best and try to be as excellent as I possibly can. And so when I hear like somebody like say Rich Cooper talking about, chase excellence, that to me was chasing excellence. And I had to sit there and like bite my tongue. Like Steve has been my Mr. Fitch, right? He's been the one who's saying, because I had to fundamentally relearn my instrument. I had to play in a different way. I had to learn to a metronome. I never used a metronome in my life. And I was like, okay, I got a metronome. What do I got to do? And it was all polyrhythms, and it's oddball time signatures. It's not just 4/4 rock and roll now. It's like, it might be like 5/4. It might be 4/6. And I'm trying to learn these things, and because that's the way this sort of, we play a progressive metal kind of thing, not unlike say like Trivium or Dream Theater or something like that, but it's very specific, very precise kind of music, and you have to have a dedication to it. And really what that taught me was how to not only be a better musician, and I'm a better musician as a result of that, but I also had a commitment to excellence. And I also have realized, if I'm going to do this, I gotta be 100% all the time. I got to put in the hours, I got to do the homework, and I got to fundamentally change who I am as a musician. As a result of it, I like who I am as a musician much better. So when I watched that movie and I saw the guy was just very, demanding and very, not my rhythm, or not my tempo, right? Were you fast or were you slow? Were you ahead of it or were you behind it? That kind of spoke to me at that time, because I was thinking in terms of, I'm not sure that a lot of kids of the age of that guy who was the drummer in the movie really understand that commitment to excellence and what it takes to go from being ordinary to becoming extraordinary. And
Yeah,
maybe
yeah. I
he
mean,
was abusive in certain ways, but
Yeah,
at the
yeah.
end of the movie, he's like, I wanted the best out of you. And I know it was there. And that was how we got you from transition you from being what you were to what you are now.
Yeah. And as I was saying before, there's a lot of hyperbole, and there's some things that are over the top. I
It seems like
understood what they
bullying,
were.
yes.
Yeah. I mean, I understood what they were getting at, and it actually is an interesting sort of contrast and dynamic between older teaching styles, especially those that were really practitioners, people that were professional musicians, and then later on they decided that they wanted to teach, right? And maybe they had acquired whatever necessary degrees they needed to get a professorship, but just earlier in their career, and 20 years they lived in New York and they played with everybody, and decided, oh, you know what, I don't want to be on the road anymore. I want to settle down. Hey, let me take a teaching gig. And I think sometimes what happens is, what is it? What's the saying? Education is expensive, right? So it's expensive in time, right? And it's not efficient, right? So when you're learning stuff by yourself, especially, I'm just gonna, whatever many repetitions it takes for me to get this right, I'm going to do it, right? You don't necessarily have the best pedagogy, the best methodology. No one really necessarily taught you specifically what to do. You just know, I'm just going to keep playing this over and over until I get it right.
Mash it into your head.
But the thing is that in an academic institution, especially these days, you can't just tell kids, just keep listening, you'll hear it. Or just keep playing it over and over, and eventually it'll happen, because they expect you to be able to give them something that actually will shorten their pathway. Okay, what is the trick? What's the tip that you have that's going to cut off? That's going to make me get to the place where you were.
Hack. Yeah, give me
faster.
the cheat codes. Yeah,
right. And that's what the expectation is, and that's the benefit actually of real pedagogy. Right. And the reason why you see an astronomical number of these child prodigies and people that play a lot more instruments at a high level is because the pedagogy is way better, and the access to information is far more plentiful.
Absolutely.
YouTube, right? So you can just watch. You can say, oh, let me learn how to do this thing. And there's a lot of good teaching that if you just follow this and do this consistently for this amount of time,
you have access to masters and mastery like you've never had before. I was just gonna say is I agree with that 100%, and I think that there's a qualified, and when we were talking about teachers, like guys looking for stuff online or looking at us as teachers for whether it's red pill or whatever else, but I think that there's a qualifiable difference between a teacher who will drive a student for his own, for the teacher's betterment, versus I want the best out of you. Like, I'm doing this because I want you to be the best that you can be, and this is the way you get there, as opposed to I want to be able to say I taught the best of the best kind of thing. Because there's the self-interest of the teacher versus the interest of the student. It's when that guy has when the teacher has the commitment to excellence for the interest of that student. Like, I want you to be the next Buddy Rich. I want you to be the next master of whatever it is that I'm teaching, as opposed to like, I want the glory to be able to say that I can create something like you. There's a qualifiable difference between those two kinds of teachers. And then I was also going to say this is like, CJ, the other guitarist in the band, went down to this guitar intensive. I think it was in Los Angeles or something. And now CJ is like, he's a creative guy, but he's very, very focused. And so he went to this guitar intensive, and I think Tosin Abasi was down there, and who, by the way, I think is brilliant. And then Petrucci was there, and like, so there, you get to learn with your heroes for a week kind of thing. And one of the stories that CJ brought back was, he was like, I was talking to some of the guys who were there, students there as well. And he would say, hey, what do you got on Spotify? Are you in a band? And like, he said, like, probably 90% of them weren't even in bands. They weren't creating anything. They just wanted to be, good guitar players. They weren't creating new music. They just wanted to be technically good musicians. And I think that kind of like CJ took a step back at that, because there's no collaboration, there's no creativity. It was all just technical skill, as opposed to like how do I spark creativity in these people and like form a band and actually make some music that's going to stand the test of time. And I'm wondering if that's, there's a difference, like I said before, the teacher teaching the student for the sake of, making a better student for his own glory, as opposed to like wanting to draw the best out of the student. But then there's also the student himself, who is taking it simply, taking that class to be a master at whatever it is, just to say that he has that, rather than using that mastery to create something new and something brave and something bold, I guess. But I think that the creativity aspect has to be there, and that also has to be something that has to be taught by teachers. And I think that that's a really difficult skill set for most teachers to have. So.
Yeah, there's a common misreading of the Malcolm Gladwell Outliers book with this 10,000 hours sort of principle,
to mastery.
Right? So one of the things that is overlooked is the prescription is 10,000 hours to get your foot in the door. 10,000 hours is not a guarantee. So that's the first thing. Mm-hmm. The second thing is it's 10,000 hours of someone that at least has a certain this is drowning me out now. It's 10,000 hours of someone that at least has the bare minimum amount of natural ability. So you're not going to take someone that has no natural ability, have them practice hard for 10,000 hours, and then now they've become now they're going to be great. That's not how that works. And the third thing is that a large portion of this time is not just you in a practice room, it's actually you on the bandstand. You playing with other musicians, right? So in one of the illustrations that we're talking about the Beatles, he was talking about the Beatles and how they spent so much time playing all of these gigs, laboring in obscurity, as it were. And that was a significant part of them getting to that 10,000 hours. Right? So I think it's a great book, and I suggest that everybody deal with it, and it's something that I cite frequently. But I think it needs to be understood that it's not just sitting in a room by yourself necessarily with this 10,000 hours, and 10,000 hours is no guarantee. Right? So you could be the absolute, most naturally gifted person anyone ever seen. You put your 10,000 hours in, and you still don't make a significant contribution to your discipline. Right.
Exactly. I've told my nephew wants to be a musician, and so I try to steer him in the right direction. And one of the things I say is you need to form a band. You need to play with other musicians as well, because you can't just, and I think that's kind of tragic too, because when I was learning guitar, it was so I could be in a band so that we could create music together. Now it's like, it's almost too easy just to simply sit here in the studio and just like, was it a Superior Drummer and go into Logic and play, I can actually, besides drums, I can pretty much play every instrument I need to, but I can't be in a band by myself. So that's one of the reasons why we have a dedicated rehearsal space, and we all come together. And I insisted on that. I was like, we have to have a place for us to sort of congregate so that we can create together. And everybody agreed on that. And that's really, I think, one of the strengths of the band that I'm in right now. But that seems like natural to me. Like, because I guess maybe it's because I came from a different generation where it's like the only way you could make music was to drag your amp down to wherever, whoever's house it was at that time, and play some music together and see if you were a good fit, and then go from there, as opposed to like, I'm going to learn how to play Eruption on YouTube, and you watch like a 10-year-old kid who figured it out, and like took me like 5 years to figure it out from like a cassette tape, and here's this 10-year-old who figured it out overnight because he's got YouTube. But that doesn't make
I
you the
think
best musician in the world, though.
I think a great benefit that our generation has is that we're old enough to remember when all of this technology was not available.
Mm-hmm.
So when I started playing, you couldn't just slow stuff down on your phone without changing the pitch. You know, YouTube, there was no YouTube that could just do that with anything, right?
You had to earn it, man. You had to want it, man. Yeah. I can remember when we were like the bands that I was in Los Angeles back in like the late 80s and early 90s, to scrounge up $800 so you could go in and do like a 3-song demo in a recording studio. That would take you months to come up with that as, you know, collective, because $800 was a lot of money back then, just to go in for a few, and you were on the clock the minute you walked in, and you had to be very disciplined at that point. You better know your stuff.
Or even just the access to new recordings.
That too.
You know, so if you bought something, you had to save the money up. You couldn't just have everything. Everything wasn't free.
Earn it. Yes.
And so you would play that thing until it wouldn't play anymore. Over and over and over and over. And listening parties. That was a regular thing in my upbringing. I mean, the next, you know, this Coltrane unreleased recording came out. Hey, let's grab a pizza. We're going to listen to the recording, and you're listening to it. Not
album
just
release party. Yep.
Yeah. Not listening to it just with a bunch of people that play the same instrument, but you're with people that play different instruments, and when they're listening to it, they're hearing it a different way, and then you have these conversations, and then there's this, I think, expansion of information that you cannot get if you're just in your basement with your earbuds in,
playing the tablature.
Yeah, it's just so it's I think it's a different thing, and I try to be understanding of my students in that they never knew what it was like prior, so it's very easy for them to take it for granted, all of the access to all this information. For us, the benefit is we learn to value the information because it wasn't so plentiful, but now we have access to everything, and so we've learned how to value something, and that it's plentiful is just a bonus.
Yeah. I try to tell my I have trouble relating this to like CJ because he's 25, but like anybody who asks me about my music and like especially the younger generation, it's like I try to relate the fact that there's so many other skills that you have to learn along the way. So it's not just playing your instrument. It's like, how are you presenting yourself? What are you creating? What are the songwriting you do? Do you write lyrics? Are you writing the melody? Are you writing the harmony? What are you doing? And that's one aspect. And then of course you got to have a stage show. Then you got to know your instruments. Then you got to be a technician. Then you've got to know how to fix a tube in an amp or something. You got to be able to, show up on time. You got to be able to deal with people. There's so many different like affiliated like skills that go along with just you getting up to play like 7 songs in an hour set. I that's part of being a musician. The sort of ancillary skills that you have to learn as well that you don't get, like you're saying, sitting down in front of your computer, sitting in front of YouTube and just sort of like, basically you're playing Guitar Hero, but with a real guitar.
Yeah. Well, at least it's a real guitar, because that's another issue.
Yeah,
these
right.
Guitar Hero folks think that they're actually playing music.
Yeah.
That ain't music.
Yeah. And then I got to keep my skills up too with the kids. I got to keep up with the kids.
All right, man. Well, I really, again, I really appreciate it.
I've enjoyed this quite a bit. I'm sorry we went over, but I had to ask you about some music stuff.
Oh, no, this is great. I'm keeping it all too. So
cool.
I'm keeping it all. This is great.
That's good. Yeah.
Thanks, man. And
right.
I'll be in touch. I'll shoot you all the stuff. Peace
Excellent.
out.
Let me know. All right.
All right. Now.